I know what you're thinking. Of course, a Bulls channel coming from a biased Bulls fan is gonna think the Bulls are gonna shock the NBA this season, especially if you're a non-Bulls fan and coming across this channel for the first time. You're likely just gonna click to the next video and say, this dude is delusional. But hear me out for a little bit, because although yes, I am biased, everyone is biased towards their own team, but there is also a lot of truth to what I'm about to share and why I think the Bulls will be the biggest surprise team in the league next season. So what's going on, everyone? You are listening to Bull Central here. Hope you're all doing well. Now, after the Bulls made all of their offseason moves, which were headlined by signing Lonzo Ball and DeMar DeRozan, I assumed there were going to be high expectations of the Bulls by both fans and the media. And I'll be honest, I often don't like it when those expectations are too high or unrealistic, which puts pressure on the team to where they start underperforming. So when I saw these quote-unquote professional analysts of major national media outlets talking about the moves that the Bulls made and how they won't really improve the team all that much, and after multiple rankings and polls that came out from said media outlets on their projections for where the Bulls would land in the Eastern Conference, I was, in a way, almost relieved, because I would much prefer my team to be slept on and have low expectations to then surprise everyone when they come out strong. Now, I said in my last video that I didn't want to give attention to a platform like ESPN, which just came out with their updated power rankings and had the Bulls finishing 9th in the East, tied with the Hornets and Pacers, finishing with a record of 40-42. Yes, below 500. A team with LaVine, DeRozan, Vucevic, and Lonzo Ball finishing below 500, but we'll get back to that in a sec. And so as much as I don't want to even entertain them with their lazy assessment of the Bulls, something has to be said as far as how much this Bulls team is being overlooked. Now, this really started when the media over and over kept talking about how, although yes, the Bulls are going to be good on offense with the pieces that they added, but they always emphasized on numerous occasions that the Bulls defense was going to be lousy, which would prevent them from being anything other than a fringe playoff team. Some even said they would miss the play-in, again, because their defense is going to be horrible in their view. Well, I made a video on that topic specifically about why everyone is actually wrong about the Bulls defense, so I won't go too much into detail on why that isn't accurate to begin with, but in a nutshell, if you actually look at the Bulls roster and assess each player's defensive capabilities, looking at their overall defensive rating, defensive box plus minus, steals and blocks per 36 minutes, and even more advanced metrics which point out how great some players like Alex Caruso, Troy Brown Jr., and Tony Bradley are on the defensive end, not to mention Patrick Williams, you realize this roster has some solid defensive players, better than what they were last year, and the Bulls finished 12th in defensive rating as a whole last season, which is better than more than half the league. The other thing that I pointed out was the fact that these analysts seem to forget that some of the best teams in the NBA last season, like the Nets, Bucks, and the Hawks, and even the Suns, were not good defensive teams. In fact, some of them were downright terrible, the Nets being one of the worst defensive teams in the league last year. So there's that. The misconception that the Bulls defense is going to be terrible. I've said it before, they're not going to be a great team on defense. The Bulls will have their challenges on the defensive end, but it's not going to be god-awful like some people are making them out to be, and their offense will make up for some of those defensive deficiencies, because at the end of the day, the goal of a basketball game is to score the ball. The other thing I see a lot of fans and media saying about the Bulls is that they have no depth. And I addressed this in a hot take from yesterday, but that couldn't be further from the truth if you actually took the time to view the Bulls roster outside of their main big 3 or 4 and viewed what the rest of these guys can do. Caruso, Kobe White, Dosunmu coming off the bench as the guards. The Bulls have a ton of wing depth, probably too much to be honest. Guys like Troy Brown Jr., Derrick Jones Jr., and Stanley Johnson. Front court depth in Elise Johnson, Marko Simonovic, and Tony Bradley. Players that aren't big names, but are big-time hustle players that do a lot of dirty work on the court and are incredibly impactful players despite maybe not showing up in the stat sheet on a nightly basis. And then finally, the continuing claim from people that DeMar DeRozan and Zach LaVine won't fit together, that they're too similar of players and they're not going to work well together. Well, last I checked, the only thing that I see LaVine and DeRozan that they have in common is that they're incredibly athletic players who are phenomenal dunkers, but outside of that, LaVine is a sharpshooter from outside, incredibly efficient, and also has the ability to slash to the hoop with his smooth, athletic ability and quick footwork off the dribble. DeRozan, not a three-point shooter unlike LaVine, is also a great slasher, but is much more effective in the mid-range. And then of course DeRozan has turned into a very solid playmaker as well, which LaVine isn't as much. DeRozan is also very versatile in his ability to play positions 1 through 4, so he's able to adapt in playing alongside another 2 guard, which of course he primarily played throughout his career in Toronto. Yes, both players are very ball dominant, but LaVine has shown he's still very effective in playing off the ball when guys are actually making plays for him. And with DeRozan being a great half-court playmaker and Lonzo being a great facilitator in transition, LaVine isn't going to need to be as ball dominant like we've seen in the past, because he now has guys that can actually facilitate for him. So this notion that LaVine and DeRozan won't fit together, I think is just nonsense. Like, yeah, if you're only viewing them as athletic dunkers and that's it, again, why it's such lazy analysis, then sure, they're similar, but there's so many different aspects of their game that complement each other that it just boggles my mind people think in this way. Now let's talk about where the Bulls have been falling in the Eastern Conference preseason rankings on a lot of these polls and standings, which is yet another reason why I think the Bulls are going to shock people, because they're being ranked so poorly going into the season. First and foremost, they essentially have the Bulls being a play-in team and finishing with a record of 40-42, again tied with the Pacers and Hornets. They've got the Knicks finishing 7th with a record of 44-38, Celtics 6th, 45-37, and the Hawks 5th in the East, 47-35. The top 4 teams being the Nets, Bucks, 76ers, and the Heat in that order. Now let me first just start by saying that I don't disagree the Nets and Bucks are going to be better than the Bulls and will have a better record than them, pending injuries of course, which is always a possibility with the Nets. The Heat, although I've talked about how I don't think they're going to be as good as some people are making them out to be, just because they overpaid for guys like Lowry and Duncan Robinson and will eventually regret that contract extension they gave Jimmy Butler at his age. But that being said, I do think that they're still going to be a solid team this year and likely ahead of the Bulls. The 76ers though, at 3rd, I mean, I don't know how they can put the Sixers this high with the uncertainty surrounding their future as it relates to trading Ben Simmons. I've said before, the Sixers are eventually going to have to accept a lowball offer and a trade the longer the Simmons situation drags out, which it still continues to drag out as we near training camp, at least at the time of this recording anyway. If you lose Simmons, who yes, I get has his issues and flaws, but is still a great player, and with Embiid's injury issues, and very little depth on that roster, I really don't see this team being a top 3 seed in the East. I don't. Now for the Hawks, I mean, they're still going to be a decent team, but I really think that their little Cinderella run that they had this past season was a bit of a fluke. They had a solid offseason, and of course, they still have Trae Young, but I actually do think that new foul baiting rule that is being implemented will impact his offensive production a bit. He'll still be an elite level scorer, don't get me wrong, but he's not going to be able to get to the foul line as often as he was used to seeing since entering the league. The Celtics, I mean, this team is still a question mark. They obviously underperformed last season after having high expectations with their 2 stars in Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. They did poorly in the regular season and then even had to win the play-in tournament to get into the playoffs, all but to get bounced in the first round. They have a new coach, a first-time head coach. They lost Kemba Walker, they have Evan Fournier as well. I still think they'll be a decent team. They'll be a playoff team, but a lot really depends on if they can get their act together, as you would think a team with 2 star level players in Tatum and Jaylen Brown would be able to make a deep run in the playoffs. Then the Knicks, I mean, they had a decent offseason, but this is another team that kind of had a fluky season as well this past year, and really just being revitalized with a new head coach in Tom Thibodeau, who had them working hard on defense, which that's what Tibbs does. We know that as Bulls fans. But when it came down to the playoffs, that defensive toughness didn't make as much of an impact against a high-octane offensive team in the Atlanta Hawks, and they lost in 5 games despite having home court advantage. The Hornets and Pacers, I mean, I just don't see how you could possibly consider these 2 teams to be better than the Bulls when you factor in the level of talent the Bulls have over both of these teams, especially the Hornets. I know they have LaMelo Ball, and that's what gets the media excited for this team because he won Rookie of the Year, but outside of him and an older, injury-prone Gordon Hayward, this team doesn't even come close to the level of talent that the Bulls have. So, with all of that being said, the fact that you have the media overlooking the Bulls and their underrated defensive players, and just their overall potential on the defensive end, the fact that you have them overlooking the depth that they have on the roster and just chalking it up to the Bulls only having a strong starting lineup and a starting lineup that can't play defense at that, and the fact that you have so many people feel that LaVine and DeRozan playing together is going to be a disaster because they don't fit in the same lineup. Not only that, also the fact that you have all these Eastern Conference teams that in my opinion are being overrated because of their success last season, namely the Atlanta Hawks and the New York Knicks. You add all of this together and you have a completely overlooked, slept on Bulls team that is going to use all of this fuel to prove all their doubters wrong. People keep talking about how there is so much competition in the East now, and that's why despite the added talent for the Bulls, they aren't expected to crack the top in the East. No, the Bulls are one of the reasons the East is now more competitive because of the moves that they made. Bringing in 3 players from the Western Conference, actually 4 players, I almost forgot to mention Derrick Jones Jr., over to their team. The Bulls made the East that much more competitive, and that's why they're going to be the surprise team of the league in this upcoming season, being better than teams like the Pacers, the Hornets, the Knicks, Hawks, and even the Celtics. Yes, I said it, the Bulls will be a top 5 team in the East with the talent they have, the mix of scoring and defense with players that complement each other, and the fact that so many of these guys on the roster have massive chips on their shoulder who have been doubted throughout their careers is going to be that much more motivation to making this team great. I'm going to have my predictions video coming out soon as we approach training camp, which will include my Eastern Conference standing predictions, player awards, win-loss totals, all of that, so make sure you're tuned into the channel. In the meantime, I want to know what you guys think of where the Bulls will ultimately end up finishing in the Eastern Conference. Let me know in the comments, and as always, be sure to subscribe if you're a Bulls fan, as I do post daily Bulls content. Thanks again for tuning in, guys, and I will catch you in the next one.